of every individual. It's a day to reflect on the knowledge and guidance that help us grow, and not just as a students, but as a responsible, wise individuals ready to take on the world. Now, I would like to call our advisor of Optica and SPE of ITU student chapter and director of Micro Nano CISS, who is also chairperson of Department of Electrical Engineering, Dr. Muhammad Qasim Mahmood, to invite our chief guest, Dr. Junaid Qadir. Please let's applaud for Dr. Qasim Mahmood.
Thanks, Malaika. So, on behalf of SPE and Optica chapters of ITU, we welcome all of you on this gracious event. So, just quickly give a quick brief overview of what SPE and Optica are, societies are, and what we do as a ITU, SPE and Optica chapters. So both of these societies are non-profit organizations for optics and for photonics. Where SPE is International Society for Optics and Photonics, while Optica is Optical Society of America. So the purpose of these societies is to organize conferences, exhibitions, and educational programs for researchers and developers in the light-based fields of engineering and physics, particularly in optics, photonics, imaging, engineering, so on and so forth. So ITU's chapter for SPE and Optica, they are actively engaged in various such programs, including promotion of optics and science in general, arranging various seminars and symposiums, so on and so forth, and competitions, events like this. So in the context heard by a prolific researcher and Professor Junaid Qadir. So I will briefly introduce him. First of all, sir, thanks for accepting the invitation. It's really an honor for us to have you here with us and listen some very informative and useful topic which we will be talking about fostering wisdom in the age of generative AI. So Professor Junaid Qadir, he's done his PhD back in 2008 from University of New South Wales, and his professional experience includes, currently he is Professor of Computer Engineering at Qatar University since 2021. And he's also adjunct professor at Electrical Engineering Department at ITU. He also served as a chairperson of Electrical Engineering Department at ITU from 2019 to 2021. His research interests, they are pretty diverse, and it has a strong multidisciplinary orientation that spans machine learning, ethics of technology, AI ethics, data mining, AI, pedagogical learning, and using ICTD for development. As per Google Scholar and other indexes, Professor Junaid Qadir has more than 14,000 citations with very high H index and I index with overall impact factor of more than 700. And he won various prestigious fundings, including Facebook Award, Qatar National Research Fund, and funding from Higher Education Commission of Pakistan. So with this introduction, I won't be within you and Professor Junaid. So I welcome you, Professor Junaid. Welcome you again. And now podium is for you to interact with the audience. That includes actually students from undergraduate, masters, PhD, and faculty members. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Qasim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nasalli ala rasulihil kareem. I'm very happy to give this lecture at ITU, with which I have a long affiliation, and thank you all for your kind words. So the topic I'm going to talk about today is broadly titled Fostering Wisdom in the Age of GenAI. And within this, I would be talking of three things. Initially, I will, because we are also celebrating the World Teacher Day. So I want to just ruminate a little bit on education and learning, and see, especially from an Islamic perspective, what can we study from the prophetic way of teaching about what is actually education and what education should be like. And so we will contemplate this a little bit, and highlight some aspects of education which are sometimes underemphasized. After this, I will talk about, uh, if we talk of becoming educated, it's not just being competent in a subject matter, it is also to have integrity. And that's another thing I'll be talking about in part one, when I'll be talking of a holistic picture of what education is. And finally, I will talk about some new challenges and some new opportunities with GenAI. As I talk, I will also, at the end of each section, I will pause for some question answers, and I would like to make it interactive. So initially, I will talk about the issues, and after each part, I will pause and we can have a discussion. During this work, during this presentation, I will also be sharing some works that I've done. I have written some papers on these topics. I've created some courses, and I'll be highlighting them for further exploration for those people who are interested. And I'd be happy to discuss that in the discussion section. So, firstly, I will start by talking about education and learning, and looking at this from a holistic perspective. So we know in Islam how much there is an emphasis of on ilm, on knowledge, and there are uh, verses in the Holy Quran which highlight how the people who know and who do not know, they're not the same. So what is this idea of ilm? And more holistically, education is not just ta'aleem, but it is also, as I will describe in the next slide, it is also other matters. So for example, if we look at the example of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a role model for us, we find in this verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes that Allah has given the duty to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and described the purpose of sending the Prophet as a combination of things. So the first thing here is purifying people, doing tazkiyah, and then we have teaching of the book and the wisdom. So we have ta'aleem of both al-kitab and hikmah. So it is an invitation to what we refer to as multiplex education. So I'm working with Professor Rajab Santork here at, he's currently at Hamad bin Khalifa University, and I invite you to have a look at his work. He talks of the multiplex worldview. So I think we do a misservice to education when we just look at education as something we do for getting a job. It is much broader than that. And it's not just learning of a subject, but it is also the necessary complement to that is the aspect of tazkiyah, which can be called spiritual purification, or the training that makes you act ethically according to whatever you're learning. So this actually correlates with the idea that even us as human beings, we're not just material beings. So these days we live in an era where human beings are sometimes equated with machines, sometimes with computers. So we use different metaphors for describing human beings. However, human beings, we again have a multiplex nature. We are both body, mind, and soul. And it is, in fact, our soul which makes us uniquely human. And it is the soul that we have to purify. And in Islamic sciences, this is sometimes called the human heart. We also find in the Islamic tradition, there's a famous hadith called Hadith Jibreel, in which Angel Gabriel came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there was a discussion about three matters. The first thing was Prophet was asked by Angel Jibreel that what is Islam, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described that it is to the general idea is that Islam is based on the five pillars that we know. It includes praying, it includes fasting, and all of the five pillars that we know. And beyond that, beyond these bodily actions, there is also the belief in the heart, which relates to Iman, which relates to, for example, the belief that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Alim, all-knowing, Allah ta'ala is Al-Qadir, omnipotent, and Allah ta'ala has power over all things. And also the belief in the unseen realm of angels and other matters which are in the realm of Iman. But there is another aspect as well, which is called Ihsan, and which I will be emphasizing more because that also relates to our professional conduct. Ihsan linguistically refers to making something beautiful, and technically, Ihsan, I will describe it in the next slide, is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like as if you see Allah. And if you cannot see Allah, then you know that Allah is seeing you, which means we have this presence of Allah which guides us and which keeps us accountable. So therefore, education is not just ta'aleem, it is also, there are words we use in Arabic and in Urdu. We say ta'aleem or tarbiyat. Tarbiyat is related to Iman, and there is also tazkiyah and something called ta'deeb, which means learning about the proper way of doing things. So I argue that it is necessary for us as the Islamic civilization to hold true to this vision of education and not to think of this as something only theoretical, but to bring it within our lives and to show to the world how a researcher who acts on ihsan would work and how he would be different from the others. So I will also talk about how this tazkiyah aspect is not something that is just a superfluous complement. It is in fact necessary for the education that we must be emphasizing. So here on this slide, I describe why focusing on tazkiyah is indispensable. Because we find in the Holy Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that indeed Allah only accepts from the righteous. The translation of the verse is that it is only the people of taqwa who Allah ta'ala accepts from. Okay, so this highlights the importance of intention, the importance of having a sound heart. And we also find in a hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that ihsan, or what can be referred to as spiritual excellence, is prescribed in all matters. So it's not just in your prayer that you have to feel this presence of Allah, but also in your professional matters. If you're a student, you must study with ihsan, and your religion should make your actions beautiful and perfected. Even such that the hadith says, even if you are to slaughter an animal, you must learn how to do it and then do it properly so that you spare suffering to the animal being slaughtered. We also find that, it's not just the output of scholarship that matters. And we should not think too much about just the appearances. When we talk of tazkiyah, the most important thing becomes the need for sincerity, ikhlas, and the right intention or niyyah. And we know that this is a famous hadith. It's there in Sahih Muslim. in which it is said that there are three people who will be thrown into fire, and in a way, Jahannam would be first ignited with them. And these are not ordinary people. These are people who have done great things in life, apparently great things. For example, the first person is a martyr, is a shaheed. The second person is an alim, is a scholar. Okay, and the third person is someone who was very rich and he used to spend a lot on people. So, in fact, these people will be thrown into fire because they did not have the right intention, which highlights the importance that, of ikhlas. That if we do actions for just material ends, then our actions, they are not something that will be acceptable before Allah. So we need to first of all intend as students and as teachers, as scholars, that we are undertaking our actions as worship, and then this becomes, because anything that is mubah and we do it with the right intention, it can become worship if we have this intention that we intend to serve Islam and God through this. We also find in another verse that it is said that on the day of judgment, only those people will succeed who come to Allah with a sound heart. So it's important that we think about, even though we live in an era of technology, we think about how we can be more ethical. And these technologies, they help us, not being distracted, and also keep us focused on this attribute of ihsan which we must acquire, and this work on our heart which is necessary. Like I said, it's not superfluous. I will describe later how I did a course on this, and it's upon us to see in our respective professions, as a student, as a professor, as a researcher, as someone who publishes, as someone who supervises work, what it means to act ethically, what it means to have tazkiyah, and what it is that we must do. So let me now just think with you about what scholarship with ihsan would look like. So this is the part of Hadith Jibril which refers to what ihsan is. And the Arabic word says that ihsan is to worship Allah. Anta abudallaha ka'annaka tarahu fa illam takun tarahu fa innahu yarak, which means that you worship Allah as if you see him, and if you cannot achieve this state of devotion, then you must consider that he is looking at you. So if we have ihsan in our scholarship, basically we will have things that are beautiful. So works of beauty will be produced, work that are done at the level of itqan. Itqan is a word which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also used for his work. Allah ta'ala, all of the action he has done, Allah ta'ala has perfected it, and Allah likes to see this attribute in Muslims. So our aim should not be just different sort of quantitative metrics, GPAs, citations, papers. It must be to do beautiful work for the sake of Allah and for the service of people. So this brings us to the question that if we want to then strive for excellence, what is it that we must aim to achieve? So should we be looking at medals, or having some career achievements, or having some degrees or certificates, or even just like admiration from people? So we find these are all things that we should not explicitly have as our goal. If we work to please Allah Ta'ala and to do things for the sake of Allah in a way that is aligned with ihsan, Allah will give these things to us. But if you just make these things your target, then basically these things become meaningless. And we find today a problem with the modern universities, modern education, especially the Western education that is now globally applied, is education and scholarship has become commercialized and commoditified. So because of that, we don't just appreciate scholarship like we used to. We just count, like, this paper, this person has these number of papers, this person has these number of citations, and everyone is just in this rat race. So we should not strive for these external aims, these dunyavi aims, we can call it. Any aim which is other than Allah, the pleasure of Allah, we can call it as dunya, where dunya in linguistically means something that is lower. Okay, so dunya means something that is not really worth aiming for. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Qasas, and seek through which Allah has given you the home of the hereafter, and do not forget your share of the world. So the translation of the verse means this, that our irada, our aim should be for akhirah, but we should not forget the nasib of this dunya. So we have to work in this dunya, we earn akhirah through the dunya, but our matma nazar, our aim, our nasbul ain should all be just, the akhirah and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, ihsan engenders thankfulness to God, and it should engender thankfulness to God, because whatever thing we have, whatever ni'mat we have, whatever accolades we have, whatever achievements we have, if we think about it, it is just merely the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the special grace of Allah. And Allah ta'ala says this in the Quran, that whatever ni'mah you have, it is from Allah. That's another verse that is coming. And Allah ta'ala advises us to describe the blessing. Okay, so we find in a story reported, this is from the Israeliyat, that there is the story of a leper, bald man, and the blind man. You might have heard of this story, where these three people, they had certain deficiencies, and they prayed to God, and God cured them. But then an angel came again to these people, and when that angel came in the form of a human being and asked for something, the leper and the bald man, they forgot the special grace of Allah. That, at different times, we all ourselves, wherever we are, if we look back, there were many cases where we thought, we prayed to Allah, if I can have this, it would be great. And then we forget it. But for people of ihsan, it's necessary that we remember the grace of Allah, and we recognize and be thankful to God. We also can talk about we think we live in a meritocratic society, and we think whatever we have is because of my knowledge. But in fact, research on this shows that, in fact, a lot of the success people have, it's because of factors that are not under the control of the person. So for example, it could be a lucky break. Maybe the person got into a top university. Maybe at the start of a research career, the person got a big grant, and then success breeds more success. So the thought that it is us ourselves which have the success, this is the thought of Qarun, which is mentioned in the Quran. For the people of ihsan, it is that we always say that whatever we have, as stated in this verse from the Holy Quran, وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Whatever thing we have from Allah, and it is in fact a trust with us. So Allah Ta'ala gives these capabilities to us with which we have potentialities, and Allah sees whether we use them with ihsan or not. So with this, again, I'm coming now to the end of section 1. So with this orientation of ihsan, We should be striving for quality and not merely quantity. And we find in the Holy Quran that even in the actions that we do, Allah Ta'ala will judge us on who is better in deed. In terms, the word used is ahsanu amala, more beautiful in deeds, more has better deeds with more ihsan. So Allah Ta'ala did not say that who has more actions. So the kasrat of actions are not demanded as such. It is the actions that are beautiful. In fact, in another verse, Allah Ta'ala says that the takasur, the mutual race of increase, it actually distracts people. So that sort of race over quantity is not something that is praiseworthy. However, we also find this another idea we find in the Hadith tradition is that the someone who lives longer and excels more in deed, that person is better. That's the best thing, that you can somehow combine quality with quantity. So it's not saying that you should not do more actions. In fact, we have that imperative as well. But the most important thing is to become people of ihsan and to be engaged in this pursuit of ihsan. In fact, we find that this ihsan is a pursuit, and I advise my students to think of scholarship as a pursuit which is a joy in its own right. So you don't do research for something. You just enjoy your research. You try to make it as beautiful as you can. You try to make it as high quality as you can. And that is the game you are in. And in fact, Allama Iqbal in this verse says, uh, I can read this, Naqsh hai sab na tamam, khune jigar ke baghair, nagma hai saudae kham, khune jigar ke baghair. So khune jigar is a term which Allama uses for another term he uses is ishq, which is this pursuit. And we also find this in the hadith that, it's not just one thing we are looking for. It is like a journey. In the hadith, we find a believer never satisfies doing good until he reaches Jannah. So, what I advise my students and what I advise other researchers to think about is not to just think of some target, because whatever target it is, when you reach it, then what? Okay, so in fact, some people call it a hedonic treadmill. On a treadmill, you keep walking, but you are always at the same place because you adapt. So whatever you have, it will not satisfy you. And people have done research on this, and in psychology, we call it a hedonic treadmill. So ihsan, on the other hand, is not just the pursuit of material goals. It is the pursuit of spiritual excellence. So for that, we adapt and evolve and keep learning. Another verse of Allama talks of this, palatna jhapatna jhapat kar palatna lahu garam rakhne ka hai ek bahana, that when you do research, it is to actually be alive, because learning is an attribute of the living. So we are not learning just for a degree. We are not learning just for some research award or something. It's something that you should enjoy, and what some people call it autotelic, something that is the objective itself. You're not doing it for something else. So now I'll pause for some break. I will highlight some resources I have related to this, which you can watch on your own. And so I have, for example, the resource on the left-hand side is a course I did a few years ago on Ihsan for Muslim professionals, which expresses similar ideas, but in more detail. We also published a paper on this, which looked at lots of hadith and explored the meaning of ihsan, especially for people who work and what it means for professional excellence. I also taught this course at the university level with my TA Suleiman, who's still at ITU. I don't know if he's in the audience. And we had this research project. Even in your research, try to think about how we can either work explicitly on promoting an Islamic ethical worldview, or in your pedagogy as well. If you're teaching ethics, why not teach it in line with the Islamic ideals of ihsan? So I try to do that. In fact, if there are teachers in this meeting, I'm happy to share all of the material. I described all of that in this paper. In fact, this paper has a link to the material as well. So if you just download this paper, you would be able to find the material, but I'm happy to share if someone wants this material. I also published a paper in 2021 on a holistic education for the 21st century engineer based on wisdom and multiplexity. It's related to the idea of multiplexity, which I just highlighted. So I'm happy to pause now for some questions, and then we'll go on to part two. So we'll have at least one question. So after that, we can proceed if there are no more questions. So I look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Dr. Kadir, for that inspiring and insightful session. Anyone in the audience?
I have one question.
Yes, sir, please.
Sir, see, once being a researcher, she is the kind of listening. Am I audible?
Sir,
Uh,
is Kasim audible?
uh, I can hear, but it's not perfect. So if you can, the one who is closer to the computer, if you can just repeat the question at the end as well.
Yes. So just small question. So being a researcher, for example, and you're working on science and technology domain, you go very deep in the thought process, both GenAI method. And now, I mean, linking, and obviously that whole knowledge is more regarding materialistic world, because what we are actually doing research, that is mostly towards the materialistic world. Then, I mean, how to link that kind of, you see, penetration into materialistic world with Ehsan. I mean, how to, it's very always very difficult to generate a link between, you see, that materialism and then spiritualism. So you just like guide us
Right,
today.
right. Very good question. And it is very hard. The reason is that we often do not have the training for that. So we do not spend much time on our Islamic education. We do not have the tools through which we can access the Islamic literature. We don't know the Arabic language. We hardly know Urdu. We do not know Farsi. So we are not really grounded in our own worldview. So what I suggest is that all of us who are committed to Islam should also learn about the Islamic intellectual tradition, and so that we work in our respective domains to present an alternative. So, for example, I once went to Dr. Asad Zaman, who is a famous economist, and he's working currently on coming up with an alternative Islamic economics uh, material which describes how we can study economics but without the materialistic or the atheistic assumptions, and how can we base it on the Islamic worldview. So for that, I think this idea of multiplexity is very good. I'm working with Dr. Rajab again because multiplexity says that we use a combination of methods. For science, we use empirical methods, but science also has certain interpretation which goes on. So there is some data, we accept empirical facts, but sometimes we interpret the data and we think that is the only interpretation. So it is necessary for us that we reclaim the conversation. And we also find, especially the research on AI has now shown, that ethics is very important. And ethics is not something that can be divorced from technology. Technology cannot be divorced from its social implications. So when we study this, again, most of the world currently is looking at it only from a materialistic perspective. And that again has issues. That is deficient in some way. So it's upon us to actually contribute to the discourse and to make contributions to learn the tradition, because it's hard for the Islamic scholars to know the technology, right? So you have to act like a bridge, learn from the Islamic scholars, and become an expert in your own area. And wherever you have things that are related to ethics, think of coming up with new scholarship. That is what I also highlighted, that you need to find your own niche and contribute there. And it's a very worthy goal to spend your time on. So we should, I think, to summarize, we should work on our own education and then try to bring it to bear on whatever work we're doing. Thank you, Dr. Qasim, for your nice question.
Thank you, Dr. Junaid. We have an online joinee who just wants to ask a question. Mohammad Zishan, please have your question on the ground.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम डॉक्टर साहब, मैं जिशान बोल रहा हूँ नस से। उम्मीद है आप खैरियत से। अच्छा, मेरा क्वेश्चन जो है वो प्रैक्टिस के ऊपर है कि इन तमाम चीज़ों को इंटीग्रेट करने के बाद क्या आपने अपने रिसर्च और तजर्बा से कोई टेस्ट लाइव क्रिएट समझ आया आपको कि जो हमें रन टाइम पे सेल्फ वैलिडेशन हमें थोड़ी सी हो जाए? इस पे थोड़ा सा आप कमेंट करेंगे। जज़ाकल्लाह डॉक्टर साहब।
जी जिशान, थैंक यू फॉर योर क्वेश्चन। उम्मीद है आप खैरियत से हैं। तो ये क्वेश्चन इस तरह है कि इसका बड़ा पर्सनल नौयत का है, और इस तरह का अभी कोई हार्ड एंड फास्ट कोई इस तरह की चेकलिस्ट तो नहीं है। लेकिन ये है कि बेस्ड ऑन दी जनरल इंस्ट्रक्शंस जो भी हमने देखी हैं, हम देख सकते हैं कि भाई हम अपना एक मुहासबा कर सकते हैं, हम अपनी एनालिसिस कर सकते हैं कि व्हाट इज इट दैट इज ड्राइविंग अस, और फिर हम में भी एक कम्युनिटी बना सकते हैं जो कि एक दूसरे को ऑनेस्ट रखती है, एक दूसरे से डिस्कशन होती है। क्योंकि आमतौर पे आजकल जो डिस्कशंस हैं वो, या आप ये कर सकते हैं कि सिर्फ अगर हम देखें, जब हम स्पिरिचुअल एक्सेलेंस की बात करते हैं तो प्रोफेशनल एक्सेलेंस इज अ पार्ट ऑफ इट। तो आप ऐसे काम करने की कोशिश करें, ऐसे लोगों के साथ कोलैबोरेट करें who are committed to improvement, who are committed to serving people, who are committed to creating pro-social technology. So I think this aspect is also Islamic. Islamic का मतलब हमें थोड़ा सा broadly देखना पड़ेगा. So anything that is trying to help people, serve people in a way that is not specific only to one community. अगर इस तरह की कोई टेक्नोलॉजी है तो इट्स ऑल्सो आई थिंक वर्थ वर्किंग ऑन। तो मेरे ख्याल से अभी तक ये एक ऐसी चीज है जो कि जजमेंट इन्वॉल्व करती है। इसमें कोई सच कोई एक चेकलिस्ट तो उस तरह नहीं है। लेकिन हम जिस तरह ये कुछ मटेरियल शेयर किया, जैसे मैंने आपसे this playlist on the left hand side, it goes on into some more detail. I think we have 10 points there related to Ihsan for Muslim professionals. So those are the kinds of things we can look into and judge our own self. तो एक और important aspect यहाँ ये है कि ये जो judgment है ना, it is for our own self. Okay, ihsan is something that is deeply personal. It's not to go and accuse people, okay, you're not a person of ihsan. That's not how this works. This is for our own self. And yes, you can go and ask people that, okay, I think I have a problem with this. Do you think so? What is your feedback? So we need to have this inward perspective. और ये आमतौर पे तसव्वुफ में भी है, तस्किया, the field itself, तस्किया, that can teach us how we can apply these rules in our professional lives. So we have many ulama who are experts in this area. We can talk to them and see, and then contribute to our own community, and learn from them, and then tell them what signs of ihsan will look like for your community, and then you teach it to your students.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay, so thank you so much, Dr. Junaid. We just realized that we have some foreigners also here. So I would just like you to dedicate them also and conclude to your ihsan and your education on wisdom or regarding the generative AI. I would just request you to conclude this to them also.
I'm sorry, I could not understand.
Actually, sir, we have some joinees from other communities other than Muslims. So I would just like you to conclude your remarks for them also, so that they can understand your
Yeah.
perspective
So
on that.
I have been speaking in English. So if there are any questions related to whatever I have been saying, please feel free to ask. So this goes on to anyone who has joined. So if there are no more questions, we can go on to the second part.
Okay, sir, sure. Is there
Right.
any question from here? No, sir, we should go to the section two.
Okay. So the first thing was related to, I emphasized how spiritual excellence is an important part of what we as scholars and as teachers and students must do. The other aspect is to acquire competence along with integrity, because we find in the Holy Quran this verse that verily the best person whom you can employ is the one who is al-qawi and al-amin, strong and trustworthy. So someone who is al-amin would be a person with integrity, the kind of thing we emphasized in part one. And the second thing would be you become strong, competent in your domain. So how can we do that? In fact, we find that even in this era of Gen AI, where we are talking of leveraging AI, and the emphasis is on AI, but high quality humans are still the biggest asset we have. And we go back in history and we see once Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was sitting with a group of his companions. He asked them to make a wish. So we see from their thinking, firstly, one companion said, I wish to have as much gold as would fill this whole house so that I could spend it in jihad. This is a good wish. However, it's still materialistic in a way. Hazrat Umar did not finish with this. He said, make another wish. So he was thinking of something else. Another man said, I wish this house be full of jewels and pearls and I could spend it all in jihad. Again, a very virtuous wish. However, Hazrat Umar asked for the third time, make a wish. And the companion said, we do not know what to say, Amir al-Mu'mineen. And Hazrat Umar said, I wish that this house was full of men like Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, Muaz ibn Jabal, and Salim radiallahu ta'ala anhum, who works for Abu Hudhaifa, this was Salim, in order to use them to spread the word of Allah. So the word we use here is called Rijale Kar, Kam ke log. ठीक है तो when we so it's very important when we talk of competence that people be actually useful for the thing they have to do. And the biggest aim we can have as Muslims would be to spread the word of Allah, and this is what Hazrat Umar emphasized. But for our professions, it could be to serve people. Okay, so that is also something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from us as researchers. So in this regard, we should, to become more competent, we should commit to lifelong learning and investing in our own self. So this is actually, I don't know if you know this guy, but people who do electrical engineering, they would recognize him as Richard Hamming, who was a very famous electrical engineer. Um, he wrote a book called The Art of Doing Science and Engineering, and his interest was how do successful people become successful. And he worked at Bell Labs for some time, and he noted that the people who had a vision, those were mostly the people who made an impact. They wanted to make an impact. And he saw that the people who have no vision, they're just thinking of very mundane matters, just getting a job, getting settled, living a comfortable life, having good salary. They were not very successful. And he also remarked something which I talked about as an attribute of ihsan, that the true gain is not in the achievement itself, but it is in the struggle we make that makes an achievement meaningful. A life without a struggle on your part to make yourself excellent is hardly a life worth living. So we find Richard Hamming saying something which aligns with our vision of ihsan. So we can make tiny gains gradually. If we keep on working on ourselves, we can become exponentially better. In fact, this is called the Matthew effect, in which we find that someone who has a small advantage, over time, the advantage gets compounded. Okay, so someone who is a little better in reading or writing, over time, they get a big advantage. So anything you can distinguish yourself in, keep yourself committed to improvement, you will find that over time it will give you a huge advantage. So if you want to be competent, you don't become competent in one day. So you have to make mistakes, you have to become better slowly, but then you find this compounding effect, which means the richer you are, the richer you will become. So the return you get actually depends on how much quality you already have. So the best time to start is, therefore, it was yesterday, but if you did not start yesterday, you should start today, because the more you delay, the less time you have for improvement. So I have done some work on related matters. So I wrote a few papers which I can refer you to. Learning how to learn, this is a meta skill. If you learn how to learn, you bring it to all of your pursuits. So in 2014, I wrote this paper in IEEE Potential, which is a magazine for students, what every student should know, 7 learning impediments and their remedies. I invite interested students to have a look at it. Then in 2018, I wrote another paper. This time, it was from a different perspective. Earlier paper was about common mistakes and how not to do them. But here I highlighted, based on my study of the literature, what are the better ways of learning. And finally, this year, I revisited these papers and I wrote another paper called Learning 101 Reloaded, in which basically I discuss what is new in this new Gen AI era and what is it that we still need to learn from the earlier era about how learning works and how to teach and how to learn. In terms of subject matter expertise, so because I'm a computer engineer, I also worked in the electrical engineering department. We wrote this paper. Again, people who are interested can look at this, where we said that we need different kinds of competencies. We require technical skills, but we also require metacognitive skills. We also require breadth skills. We also require inter and intrapersonal skills. And when you keep on working on all of these, you will begin to have a very strong competitive advantage. So you should, for example, be committed to improving your language, improving your reading, improving your writing. You should know sufficient information from other fields. So you should not just be like a nerd who is just focused on one narrow field. You should know something about economics. You should know something about politics. You should know something about philosophy, because there are ideas from different fields that can be brought into another area. And this is how you can innovate and be creative. I have talked about how learning how to read and write is a very valuable skill. I created this playlist which anyone can watch on YouTube, and this is something that this is part of our craft. As researcher, as a teacher, you are in the business of communicating, so you should learn how to communicate well. And there are many books on this, and you should become a student of this craft. Whatever craft you're working on, be committed to improvement. So you should read about what other people have figured out, because if you have an advantage in this, it really is a very strong advantage. It can help you in many places. Also, learning how to collaborate is an important skill. And here I refer to the work of Stephen Covey, who said that it is better to be independent than dependent. However, the best thing you can do is to be interdependent, which is where synergy and win-win partnership arise. If you approach someone for collaboration without being yourself any worthy of being a collaborator, people would generally not be interested. However, if you become good in your own area, you can contribute and work with other people. So many great achievements have been achieved in partnerships of two or more people. So this is the idea of collaboration, and it's a nice thing to do. But as advised by Stephen Covey, you should not become like a parasite. You should become interdependent. So you do something, you bring something to the table as you collaborate. So the second part was quick. The first part had some ideas we discussed in depth. I have highlighted some references which you can watch on your own, and I'm happy to discuss if you have questions related to the three papers I showed you. The student mistakes paper, the learning 101 paper, and the learning 101 for the GenAI era. Here again, this is another verse from Allama Iqbal, which says, Hayat zoke safar ke siwa kuch aur nahi. So this is the journey of improvement and acquiring competence, becoming strong in your area. It's not something that finishes. You must be committed to your craft and continue to improve. So these are some papers I wrote. Again, we spent a lot of time on this, so anyone who reads these papers would benefit from seeing the related literature. This student primer is actually for students, how to thrive in engineering education. So we wrote it during the time of COVID, but it was not COVID specific. So it is also something we can do beyond COVID. These two papers are different in the sense that the first highlights common mistakes, the second highlights effective techniques. I also mentioned we wrote a more recent paper, and we see here how becoming competent is actually a long process. We see success at the end, at the surface, but it involves failures. Anything worth trying for, you will fail at various points. So you should be persistent, you should be ready to sacrifice, you should be ready to work hard. And at the same time, not be, it sometimes stings to fail and to be rejected. However, you take it in your stride. Like here we see in the verse, hayat zoke safar ke siwa kuch aur nahi. So you are on a journey. So I'll again take pause here. I'm happy to invite your comments and see what I can learn from you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to respond. So I'll wait for a question from anyone.
Sir, I think there is no question from here and not from the online joinings. So is there any other section of your talk? I
Gee,
think we
there
should
is
proceed.
another question, but I will wait for a question. So at least one question, and
Got
it's
it.
just, yeah, people, when you make them ask, they will ask. So I'll wait. I'll wait for a minute or two, and we'll see.
Okay, sir, I'm Amar Rafiq. I have a question. So
Gee.
when you mentioned that you make tiny gains, then eventually you make a big impact. But how can I quantify that I have actually made a tiny gain daily?
Um, right. So there's this concept called gap and the gain. So someone also wrote a book on this. The gains that you make are often small, so you don't see them accumulating over time. But you can audit yourself after some time, after 3 months, after 6 months. Sometimes we get in the thick of things, we don't see how we're advancing. So just like, when your child is growing up, you take a measure of the height, and after 6 months, if you see there is a strong growth, that reassures you. Similarly, you should uh, look back and see where you were a few months ago, just to see if you're growing or not. So if you are growing, then that should be a relief, and that should make you happy. If you're not, that should concern you, that you're not really growing, you are doing the same thing again and again. And usually when we are not growing, we fall back, and eventually we even become less strong than what we were earlier. So we should be committed to this improvement, and the way I think we can do it is just to audit ourselves after some time. And I think it's a good book to read, Gap and the Gain. It's by an entrepreneur called Dan Sullivan. You can find some podcast on this online as well. Okay, so Farhan has asked a question. So Farhan, can you ask this question using your mic if possible? It would be nice to hear you. So Farhan was one of my earliest students. If I if it's the same Farhan. Okay, so Farhan, nice to see your message after a long time. You are saying that I've been trying to incorporate learning science for engineering students in the courses I'm teaching. However, I feel the system or the environment does not place good value on it. How can I make it more impactful? So I don't know what the system means, but it could be sometimes you try to do something and you feel you are moving against everything that other people are doing, and you don't get rewarded for it as such. Usually, teaching is something like that. All of our evaluation is just based on research. So if you do spend time on teaching, it's not something that is rewarded as such. However, it's part of our duty. So it's again something that we should do. And even though the metrics that we have, the way we measure performance is currently not proper, it's focused too much on research. I think we should still do it because of the attributes we covered earlier on, because you're not doing it just for your promotion. You're doing it because it is the right thing to do. Maybe that is the question you asked, but I'm not sure. Okay, Farhan and others, I think I'll continue to the last part so that we can finish in hopefully 15 minutes. Education in the Gen AI era. So many things have changed in the last few years with AI making big advances. We find that AI has expanded the things that humans can do. There are certain things that humans can do which AI can automate, but there are many more things that we can do now with AI augmentation. And in education, the focus must be on human intelligence augmentation, improving our capacity, improving our agency, our ability to do things rather than on just completing the work or just getting the right answers. So I work in the area of AI in education as well. I've published a couple of papers, which I will show at the end for interested readers. We see here that AI can be very useful for various applications. If you are into software programming, you can use Copilot. You just give it a little bit of text and it will autocomplete, or you can go to ChatGPT or other tools. There are now AI models that are optimized for code creation. So it will help you become more effective. But we will see later on there are certain caveats. These tools, they also make mistakes, and you can benefit more from them if you know the thing well in the first place. So you can use it if it's like a supervisor working with a student. If you know, you can use a student or you can work with a student to become more effective. However, you cannot just rely on a student because the student might require correction. So similarly, AI, in many cases, it requires correction, course correction. As you're moving, you need to give it certain instructions so that it comes back on track. But Gen AI as a co-pilot is an application. Personalized learning is another application. We know of the 2 sigma effect, where people who have a personal tutor, they have significantly better performance. So with chat GPT like tools, we can have a dialogue with it. If you just go to these tools for just the answers, that's not fully uh, exploiting the benefit of these tools. However, if you engage in a dialogue in which you have a Socratic exchange, in which basically the tool takes you towards the answer, then it can be very helpful. It can also be useful for writers, researchers, essayists. It can help you in creative writing. It can give you inspiration. It can give you a first draft, but that is not very advisable, especially if you get the entire first draft, because it's problematic from many angles, including an ethical angle, because you cannot really claim um, ownership of something, and you cannot be responsible for something if it's all created by an AI tool. However, if you are using it for language learning, editing or writing, improvement of writing, paraphrasing, typo correction, then it's less controversial. So the point I'd like to make here, that basics cannot be ignored even with advanced tech. The people who stand to benefit most from AI are the people who are already better. So someone who is good can achieve elite performance. Someone who is bad might sometimes succeed, but they may make horrendous errors sometimes, and they would not know when they are making an error. So therefore, it is actually the people with a good grounding, with a good base, with good conceptual knowledge who stand to best advance with this AI. So this highlights the point that the more the things they change, the more they remain the same. So the good learners, they had an advantage earlier on, they still have an advantage now. And we should, every learner should work on, maintaining this advantage so that they have the tools, the concepts through which they can critique the output of AI. So we see on this slide that Gen AI has many risks. For example, these are two vignettes. The first one is Socrates, and we know from the reading of Socrates that Socrates highlighted the danger of writing, because when people just depend on written text, they pretend to be more knowledgeable than they are. So we can have this problem now where people, they just rely on Gen AI created output, but they don't really know what it contains. We also have the problem of technological outsourcing, in which if you rely on something, what if that thing is taken away from you? So if you rely purely on ChatGPT or Gen AI, but if that tool is not available, will your IQ suddenly drop by, let's say, 50 IQ points because you don't have the tool? We should not be reliant to that degree. We should use it and at the same time increase our capacity. We also find that sometimes it gives disincentives to people, that if we can just use ChatGPT or Google to find out something or to do something, why learn and do the effort of learning something in the first place? So why learn grammar when you can give badly written text and just have it fixed by Gen AI? The problem with this approach is that if the Gen AI or the AI tool makes an error, you will not be able to know what the error is. So you will make huge, horrendous errors and you won't even know. So these are some incentives that can rise. We have also the problem of homogenization, which means that if everyone starts to depend on AI, the natural human uniqueness, it recedes, and the output of every student looks the same. It looks cliched, and at a superficial level there is an improvement, but really everyone is just depending on the tools. So lastly, I finish with this: how can we become AI bot proof? There are these books about this topic. So we need to become more wise. So even though technology is rising, it is in fact creating a wisdom gap. As things are becoming more and more complex, we need to focus on the fundamentals. We need to learn the context, the history of things. We should be able to go to the first principles so that we can analyze things deeply. We should aim at capacity building, gradually building our own capabilities and using knowledge for human benefit. So we find out that there is a need of critical AI literacy, where critical AI literacy means knowing what AI can do and what AI cannot do, and how to distinguish correct output from incorrect output, how to know the limitations of AI. So the previous knowledge that we have in the field of pedagogy is still useful. We need to understand things so that we can transfer those ideas to new situations, and so that we can critically evaluate the output of AI. So this is from one of our papers. We said that AI should be human-centered. It should be based on intelligence augmentation. So we suggested a few rules. We said if the machine is not there, you should be at least as good as you were before. Don't outsource yourself. You should not depend totally on machines. You should not allow your capabilities to drop. But if the machine is there, you have algorithms, you should be no worse than the machine. So you should learn from AI, you should see what is the output it gives, but don't depend exclusively on it. There must be some value you bring to it. There must be some competitive advantage you have, and you should work to develop this further. So this is the third part, the final part. These are some of the works I've done in this space. So if you would like to read more, you can find this paper. This is one of the highly cited papers in engineering education. This was published early on when ChatGPT was released, and then I conducted this workshop at ITU. I also authored this paper recently. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation. I thank you for your time and for your interest. If there are any final questions, I can take a question or two.
Thank you, Dr. Junaid. I guess there is one more question from Mohammed Zishan. Mohammed Zishan, please, you may ask the question.
Actually, I have multiple questions to start with. I will resort for two at least. Number one, we know
Yeah,
the
sure.
GenAI is specifically used for generating the data. And we also know that I'm not sure how much we can depend on the synthetic data. So can you comment on the applicability or the usability of GenAI, specifically number one in the research writing and number two in data sets? I think as far as the writing is concerned, you have addressed in your presentation, but as far as the data set is concerned, can you please comment on this and the output of the synthetic data, knowing the fact that in the industry, realistic data is totally different, sir?
Jay. And your second question?
Second question is about some elaboration on the writing and teaching part of the usage of GenAI.
Yeah. So do you want to ask that question, or is it just some general elaboration?
I asked it. I asked you to comment, please.
Okay. Okay. So the first thing is about synthetic generation. So actually, we should be wary of depending on counterfeit data. Counterfeit means like fake data. So if we are using it synthetically to create data that looks like real data, I don't think this is scientifically valid, because the purpose of science is to actually study the world out there. So there is this danger that you will create something that tries to imitate what the world was like in the past. However, you can never rely on it. So I think most of the journals, they don't recommend using such tools for generating data. However, in certain fields, people use it for, like, they give certain prompts and they get certain output, but then their explicit aim in the paper is just to study the quality and attributes of synthetic data. But in normal science, I don't think such an approach can be encouraged. And the other thing was about writing. So again, I think I in fact taught a course on this at ITU about writing. I think it can be a useful tool. However, we should be careful not to use it for plagiarism, and we should be careful to authenticate whatever information it has. So it is the onus is on you to check whatever it says, to corroborate, to double check what it says, and not to use it for coming up with a hypothesis or to come up with something in the first go, because it's dangerous to do that. However, if you have written something and you want it to be paraphrased, or you want advice on how it can be better expressed, or if you have a long section and you want to have it critiqued, you can say, I have this current text. can you comment how I can organize this better? Or you could, if when you know what good writing is, you can give it instructions. You can say, okay, this is the output I have. Maybe it's something you got from somewhere else, and you now want to transform it into a better shape. So you can then give it in a prompt that write it in this manner, give the big idea first, and then give an example. Maybe your text already has that information, and now you're just asking your tool to reorganize the text. So that can be, I think, excused. This is an area in which the ethics of this is still being formed. It's a dynamic area, but people now recommend that you cannot use it. You cannot give authorship to a Gen AI tool, and most journals, they say you can use it for editorial improvements, but not for data generation and not for coming up with a hypothesis in the first place.
One more question, please. In a scenario, in one case, we generate data from simulation or emulation or a test bed, and we compare its output with the realistic data. So the model totally behave differently on both of the data. Can you please comment on this?
So I would need to know what the data is about. But
Networking. What if we talk about networking data?
yeah, so I know in the field of psychology, people have, they create virtual persons, and they give them certain personas and say what would be the response of such a person. And sometimes they make use of virtual persons for training. For example, a teaching assistant is interacting with the students. So I know of a few places who are using these these Gen AI tools to emulate a student and to simulate an interaction. With the networking, we have some history of using synthetic tools. So it depends on what, we need to find the right analogy. You know that in networking we use analytical models as well. Those are also generated models, like a probabilistic model. You can also have some model generated data that's not realistic, but it's like model generated data. So if it depends on what your scenario is and how you can justify it. So I think this would require seeing the specifics and to see whether there is anything already accepted which is like what you're trying to do.
You can generally comment on any type of data. The point is that the realistic data is altogether different than the synthetic data, and a model trained on synthetic data behaves completely different on industrial data.
Yes.
So only final comments on this.
Yeah. So historically, the people who have been working in this area, even before Gen AI, they have commented on this, that simulation is often very idealized, and it's not like the real world. It can be instructive in some way. So this basically goes to the question that should we use simple models for reality? So the answer is yes, we can use models for reality, but we must keep in mind that these are models and these are not like reality. And we should use models that are fit for the application. So if the application is very high risk, then you should have very highly realistic models. If it's just you're trying to get a feel for the area, you can use abstract simple models. So I think within this area you can engage with the body of literature on modeling to see what other people have already figured out, and maybe it will require some more thinking on what it means for Gen AI.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time and continuous efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Zishan. Ms. Isma, so anything else? Okay, thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Junaid, for joining us. Dr. Rehan Ahmed actually has raised his hands and he wants to ask one question. So you can take his question. Sir, are you there?
Ji, I'm here.
Sir, Dr. Rehan Ahmed wants to ask one question.
Ji, please go ahead.
Okay.
Assalamualaikum, sir. Thanks a lot for the highly enlightening talk. One general question: there's wide talk around AGI or artificial general intelligence, where generative AI is surpasses or equates human cognitive abilities in broad spectrum of domains, and it is generally said that it's going to happen in the next 10 years or so. So, how would this discussion change once and if that happens?
Ji, mashallah, that's a very good question, and so it's a big philosophical question, and it is true that the modern tools that we have, GenAI, they are more general purpose than what we had earlier, and even like this question of what is general purpose AI, sometimes people are now calling it, to distinguish from AGI, which generally has a negative connotation. Sometimes they make use of general purpose technology. But yes, it is true that on many metrics, these tools are nearly as good as human beings, and on many they surpass the capability of human beings. And this dynamic is also changing all the while. So for every profession, people are now currently looking at it. So, for example, what is the role of a human doctor? Okay, is it just to do diagnosis, or is it, your purpose is to do therapeutics? Is your purpose doing some prescription? Is it talking like a human does with another human? All of these things, GenAI can emulate to a certain extent. In fact, there are some papers which have said that the output of these tools are seemingly more empathetic compared to human beings. So it is a cause of concern, but at the same time, this is an unprecedented challenge. So we have not seen such a massive challenge before, but it is upon us to reconfigure and think about our profession. How is it that we can still remain competitive? What is it that cannot be automated? Because I think wisdom and the judgment that comes through making lots of mistakes, by interacting with the real world, by being embodied in the real world. So these tools, they are not embodied in the real world. So they don't have that contextual knowledge. So that is one thing that distinguishes human beings from these bots. But it's an uphill challenge, right? It's an uphill task. We need to think about how can we remain relevant, and how can we, like in the end, I gave this reference to the book, How to Be Robot Proof and How to Be AI Proof. So these are just some initial thoughts. But yeah, I agree that it's a very challenging thing, and we should all begin to think about this as educators and as teachers, how to remain relevant in this world. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for this great afternoon and for sharing your experiences and your insights on this topic. And a very big and I'm very thankful to all of you for attending today's event. I hope you will leave here with some inspiring knowledge that has been shared here. And now, on the behalf of ITU, student chapters, and all the organizing committee, I wish you all a wonderful Teachers' Day. Let's just cut the cake and bring some happiness on our faces. So please, sir, join us here. And thank you so much, Dr. Sinead. We wish that you would be here and you would join us on this cake cutting ceremony for all the appreciation of our teachers who spend day and night to bring some healthy and some mindful experiences to us. Thank you so much, Dr. Khan, Dr. Amar, and Dr. Akash and Dr. Satya for being here. to make this event a wonderful time for all of us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Please, Dr. Han and everyone, please join us.